Every year, millions of people celebrate Christmas on December 25th. Churches glow with candlelight. Families gather around the decorated tree. Carols fill the air. But here is something surprising. The Bible never mentions December 25th as the date of Jesus' birth, not even once. And yet, the Bible does give us answers. Hidden within its pages are clues that reveal when Jesus was actually born. Ancient temple calendars, shepherds in the fields, orders from the Roman emperor, even the stars in the sky. All these clues point to the real date. What would happen if we could prove exactly when Jesus was born? What if every detail had been planned so perfectly that the truth has been there all along, waiting for us to find it? Today, we are going to follow the evidence-real clues from the Bible and history. And what we discover is so clear, so precise, that it will change the way you view that special night. The story you think you know is about to become far more interesting. Because when God sent His Son into our world, nothing happened by chance. Let's begin with what the Bible actually says. Luke tells us about shepherds who were watching over their sheep when angels appeared to announce the birth of Jesus. Matthew tells us about wise men who followed a star from the east. But neither of the two Gospels gives us an exact date. There is no mention of December, nor of any specific month. The exact day is never mentioned. So, where did December 25th come from? History shows that this date became tradition about 300 years after the death of Jesus, during the time of Emperor Constantine. The Romans already had a major celebration on December 25th. They called it the birthday of the unconquered sun. When Christianity began to spread, this date was adopted. But if we want to know what really happened, if we want to see the full picture, we must go deeper. The Gospels do not give us a date, but they give us something better, a timeline. Real details that allow us to trace back and calculate. The key is not found by looking directly at Jesus. It is found by looking at John the Baptist. The Bible tells us exactly how many months separated their births. If we can discover when John was born, we can know when Jesus was born. Everything begins in the temple, with a priest named Zechariah fulfilling his usual duties. What happens next starts a countdown that leads us directly to Bethlehem. The Gospel of Luke, chapter to verse 8, gives us our first clue. There were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. This may seem like just a background detail, but anyone who understands what life was like in ancient Israel knows something important. Shepherds did not stay out with their sheep during the winter. From November to February, the hills around Jerusalem became cold and rainy. Heavy showers fell. Temperatures dropped at night. During those months, shepherds brought their animals indoors to protect them. The fact that these shepherds were living in the fields, staying outside all night, reveals something crucial. It was a time of year when the nights were mild enough to sleep outdoors, when there was still enough grass for the sheep to eat. Spring or early autumn fit perfectly. Winter does not. But there is something even deeper here. The fields around Bethlehem were not ordinary pastures. Lambs meant for temple sacrifices were raised there. For generations, priests came to these exact hills to select lambs without blemish, lambs whose blood would be shed to pay for the sins of the people. And now, on one of those mild nights, Angels appear to these shepherds with an announcement. The true Lamb had been born, the one whose blood would take away sin forever. The very fields that for centuries had provided thousands of lambs for sacrifice were chosen to hear about the Lamb who would save the world. Even nature itself seemed to be part of the plan. The season, the place, the symbolism, nothing was accidental. And the next clue confirms it. An order from the Roman emperor that would fulfill a prophecy. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, tells us something that changed everything. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to register in his own town. This was not just bureaucratic paperwork. It was the way Rome controlled people, cold, efficient, without caring how it affected their lives. But even that imperial order served God's plan. It forced Joseph and Mary to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And Bethlehem was precisely the place where the Messiah had to be born. 700 years earlier, the prophet Micah had written, "But you, Bethlehem, out of you will come the one who will be ruler over Israel." Micah 5:2. An emperor who knew nothing about that prophecy gave an order that fulfilled it. But there is another detail here that helps us understand the exact timing. The Romans never conducted censuses in winter. They were practical. They needed people to be able to travel. They needed clear roads and available food. Late summer or early autumn offered all of that. Winter did not. Think of what Joseph and Mary were facing. More than 130 kilometers of travel, mostly on foot or maybe with a donkey. Mary was about to give birth, traveling in cold rain, on muddy roads, with no safe place to stay, would have been nearly impossible and extremely dangerous. But in autumn dry roads, good weather, fresh harvests to feed travelers, it all makes sense. Everything lines up. And the next clue goes even deeper into an ancient calendar that had been counting toward this moment for centuries. This next piece of evidence is incredibly precise, almost mathematical, and it begins with a priest named Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. Luke 1-5 tells us that Zechariah belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. This detail matters more than it seems. The priests of Israel worked according to a strict calendar. In the first book of Chronicles, we learn that King David divided the priests into 24 groups. Each group served in the temple for 1 week, from Sabbath to Sabbath. This rotation continued throughout the year, except during 3 major festivals, when all 24 groups served together. The division of Abijah was the 8th. Historical records and Jewish tradition help us understand when they served. In the year scholars call 5 BC, the rotations began in early spring, counting the first 7 groups and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. When all priests served together, Zechariah's turn would have come in late May or early June. But it becomes even more specific. The week immediately after Zechariah's regular rotation was Pentecost, another major festival during which all the priests had to be in Jerusalem. That means Zechariah served 2 weeks in a row, his regular week plus the festival week. Luke 1:8-13 describes what happened during that time. While Zechariah was burning incense in the holy place, the angel Gabriel appeared to him with news. His wife Elizabeth, though barren and advanced in years, would have a son. And verses 23 and 24 give us a precise detail about what happened afterward. When his time of service was completed, he returned home. Shortly afterward, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant. If Elizabeth became pregnant shortly after Zechariah returned home in mid-June, we can count forward. John the Baptist would have been born about 40 weeks later, around late March or early April of the following year for B. See. Now here is where everything connects. Luke 1:26 tells us that in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth to a virgin named Mary. That places Mary's conception around December. And 9 months after December brings us to September, early autumn of O4 BC. Let's follow this timeline step by step. First, Zechariah serves in the temple during the rotation of the 8th division, in late May or early June of 5 BC. Second, Elizabeth becomes pregnant shortly afterward, in mid or late June. Third, John is born 40 weeks later, late March or early April of O4 BC. Fourth, Mary becomes pregnant in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, around December of 5 BC. Fifth, Jesus is born 9 months later, September or early October of O4 BC. The temple calendar, established centuries before the birth of Jesus, had been counting toward that moment. Even the rhythm of priestly service week after week, rotation after rotation, was part of God's plan. The sacred routine of worship had been preparing, generation after generation, for the exact hour when heaven would send the promised Messiah into the world. As the priests marked time on earth, signs were forming in the heavens, signs that would guide travelers from distant lands to a stable in Bethlehem. Matthew tells us that wise men from the east saw a star and followed it to Judea, searching for the newborn king of the Jews. For centuries, many have wondered, what was that star? A miracle? A symbol? Or something we can actually trace? Modern astronomy gives us an astonishing answer. In 07 BC, something extraordinary occurred in the night sky. Jupiter, the planet ancient people called the king planet, and Saturn, the planet associated with the Jewish people, aligned in a very rare event. And it wasn't just for one night. For several months, these two planets appeared to meet 3 times. It was a celestial display that could be seen throughout the ancient world. And it all happened in the constellation Pisces, which ancient astronomers associated with the land of Israel. For the Magi, experts in reading the stars and knowledgeable of ancient prophecies, this would not have been an ordinary event. A king of the Jews, born in Israel. When did this happen? Between September and December of 7 BC, with the most striking moment taking place in September. It was a cosmic announcement, visible for months, guiding searchers from Babylon or Persia westward toward Judea. By the time they arrived in Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews?" He had already been born. The star had marked that moment. The heavens themselves testified with a precision that astronomers can still confirm today. The sky proclaimed what the prophets had foretold centuries earlier, that a ruler would come from Bethlehem, and that the nations would seek him. The stars announced it throughout the heavens. God spoke through the scriptures, through the prophets, and also through creation itself, arranging the planets in their orbits so that even people who had never heard of Israel as Messiah would know. Something world-changing had occurred in that September, but there is still a deeper layer of connection so powerful that it completely transforms our understanding of what it meant for God to send His Son in human form. The festivals of Israel were about to give that moment its deepest meaning. John 1:14 contains one of the most beautiful declarations in all Scripture. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Most Spanish Bibles say hablo entre nosotros, dwelt, but the Greek word John uses is ekinoson, which literally means to pitch a tent or to tabernacle among us. John was making a direct connection to the Feast of Tabernacles, one of Israel's most important celebrations. He was showing us something far deeper than simply saying Jesus lived among the people. The Feast of Tabernacles, called Sukkot in Hebrew, took place every year in early autumn between late September and early October. For 7 days, Jewish families built temporary shelters and lived in them. It reminded them of the 40 years their ancestors spent in the wilderness after leaving Egypt. It was a celebration of God's presence among His people, God who lived with them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. God who met them in the tabernacle, the tent where heaven touched earth. But the festival season began 10 days earlier, with the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the 7th month. Trumpets sounded throughout Israel, announcing the beginning of the most sacred time of the year. In Jewish tradition, this feast became known as the Coronation Day of the King, when God's kingship over creation was proclaimed. Now imagine this. What if Christ was born during this sacred season? What if the King of Heaven entered the world just as the trumpets were announcing His arrival? What if the Word became flesh precisely as Israel was preparing to celebrate God's presence among them? The symbolism becomes perfect. Emmanuel, God with us through His Son, appearing at the very time His people celebrated His nearness. The God who once dwelled in a tent in the wilderness now sent His Son in human form, living in the most perfect tent, a human body. The eternal entering time, the infinite becoming limited. And this also makes practical sense. Luke tells us that when Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem, there was no room at the inn. Why would the inns be full? During the autumn festival season, Jewish families from everywhere traveled to Jerusalem and surrounding towns to celebrate. Bethlehem, only a few kilometers from Jerusalem, would have been filled with pilgrims building their temporary shelters and preparing for the feast. The crowded inns make sense. The timing makes sense. The theological symbolism makes sense. Everything fits together. The priestly calendar placing Jesus' birth in September. The shepherds in the fields during mild weather. The star appeared in September of the year 7 BC, and now the autumn festival season from the trumpets announcing the King to the tabernacles, celebrating His presence among us. If Jesus was born during this time, the meaning becomes impossible to ignore. The King announced by heavenly trumpets, the Son of God dwelling among His people. And one day, those same trumpets will sound again when He returns. But even this perfect harmony between prophecy and festival is confirmed by one final witness: history itself. And it comes from an unexpected source: the reign of a fearful and murderous king. The Gospel of Matthew chapter 2 tells us that when Herod heard about the birth of a new king, he reacted with fear and fury. History remembers him as a ruthless man, paranoid, obsessed with power. When he failed to obtain information from the wise men, he issued one of the darkest orders in the New Testament, that all male children in Bethlehem under 2 years old be killed. A terrifying decision, but one that unintentionally gives us a very precise marker in the timeline. The Jewish historian Josephus records a key detail. Herod died shortly after a lunar eclipse, and before the Passover of the year for B.C. That single fact becomes a clear boundary. Jesus had to have been born before that eclipse, not just a few weeks before, but with enough time for the wise men to travel, for Herod to realize he had been deceived, and for the order to be issued and carried out. That is why he targeted all children 2 years old and under. He was covering a range of time. When we place all these events together, the window becomes very narrow. Jesus was born while Herod was still alive, but not before the chronological framework we already established with Zechariah and Elizabeth. Most conservative scholars agree on the same point, between 07 BC and 05 BC, with 5 BC fitting best. It allows enough time for the star to appear, for the travelers to arrive, and for Herod's fury to be unleashed. Far from contradicting scripture, history aligns perfectly as another piece of the puzzle. The ancient historian, the fearful king, the innocent children, the flight to Egypt, every detail fits into the same season. And once Herod died at the beginning of 4 BC, this chapter closed. The Messiah had already come. The prophecy had already been fulfilled, and the world would never be the same. Now that all the pieces are on the table, the picture becomes impossible to ignore. The birth of Jesus was not placed randomly on the calendar. Each clue fits the next like gears turning in perfect synchronicity. The shepherds were outside at night, something that only happened when the nights were mild, the pastures were open, and heavy rains were not falling. That alone takes us out of winter and moves us towards spring or autumn. But the census adds even more weight. Rome did not mobilize millions during the stormy season. They chose dry roads, safe travel, and harvest time. Once again, autumn becomes the most logical moment. Then the temple calendar enters with mathematical precision. Zechariah serves at the end of spring. Elizabeth conceives shortly after. 6 months later, Mary receives the angel's announcement. 9 months after that, Jesus is born. The timeline points to early autumn of the year, for BC astronomy paints the same picture: Jupiter and Saturn rising together in the skies over Israel. In September of 07 BC, announcing the birth of a Jewish king, astrologers in the East receiving months to prepare for their journey. And then comes one of the most beautiful pieces, the Feast of Tabernacles, a season of joy, of families living in temporary shelters, celebrating the God who camped among his people. The language of John becomes clear. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Finally, the death of Herod closes the window completely. Jesus had to have been born before early 04 BC. All the evidence, scripture, history, tradition, astronomy, climate, and priestly rotation now aligns into a single conclusion: early autumn. Most likely September of the year O for BC, even the rest of Jesus' life fits that pattern. If he was born in early autumn and began his ministry around age 30, then a ministry of 3.5 years that ended at Passover places his crucifixion in A.D. 30 or 31. The numbers align as smoothly as the prophecies. Everything, every sign, every clue, every prophetic word points in the same direction. This was God writing history with purpose. So, where does this leave us? Some people may continue debating the date. December 25th will continue being celebrated, and there is beauty in that tradition. But what we have discovered here is something deeper than a date. It is a pattern, a fingerprint of divine precision woven into every detail of Christ's arrival. From the priestly calendars in the temple to the movements of distant planets, from the routines of shepherds to the decrees of emperors, from the sacred festivals of Israel to the rule of earthly kings, everything moved according to a plan set before the beginning of time. The evidence shows it beyond any doubt. God planned every detail with perfect exactness. We can trace it. We can calculate it. We can see how heaven and earth aligned in September of 4B. See, during the holiest season of Israel's calendar, the trumpets announced the king. The nation prepared to celebrate the presence of God among his people through his Son. And that is exactly what happened. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. But what about December 25th? Why has that date lasted so long? Historically, the early Christians were not focused on identifying the exact day of Jesus' birth. For them, the date carried symbolic meaning. Many of the church fathers held to an ancient belief that great men died on the same day. They were conceived a tradition that, though not based on historical evidence, carried a theological sense. Since the Gospels show that Jesus died during Passover, near the spring equinox, they reasoned that his conception had occurred in that same season. Counting 9 months from the spring equinox brought them to the winter solstice, which in the old Julian calendar fell on December 25th. So although December 25th was not chosen because it matched the actual date of his birth, it became a symbolic day to honor the miracle of the incarnation, the moment when God sent his Son in human form, and light entered the world during the darkest time of the year. The true miracle is not the exact day on the calendar. It is the truth that God sent his Son into history. The promised Messiah entered our world. The Word became flesh. But here is the question that matters most. If the Word truly dwelt among us, then does he dwell in you today? If God cared enough to arrange every detail of history for that moment, the stars, the calendars, the prophecies, even the mathematics of time, how much more does he care about the details of your life, your struggles, your questions, your search? The story of his birth continues today. In every heart that receives him, in every life surrendered to his presence, in every soul that hears the same message the angels proclaimed on that autumn night. Do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy for all people. The date is no longer a mystery, but the meaning is eternal. God sent his Son at the perfect moment, in the perfect way, fulfilling every prophecy and orchestrating every detail of creation to announce one truth: Emmanuel, God with us. And he continues to come to every heart willing to receive him.